Okay, so to start Math 126 here, we are going to look at the concept of functions. And as we get started here, we're going to look at some definitions first, just to have some in our notes. So some definitions for us. First, we'll look at the definition of a relation. And the definition of a relation, so a relation is something, and for example, an equation, since we're in a math class, let's kind of relate things to math type things. So a relation is something, maybe an equation, that relates one thing to another. For example, variables. And let's see here, next definition we need before we can start doing examples. Let's go ahead and define a function. A function is a relation for which every input has exactly one output. And let's look at a few quick examples here just to kind of describe what that means. So a function is a relation for which every input has exactly one output. Well, let's just look at two equations here. And let's say for these equations, suppose y depends on x. So y is the dependent variable, x is the independent variable. And let's just look at two equations here. Let's say y equals x plus 1 and y squared equals x plus 3. So y equals x plus 1, no matter what we plug in for x there, we're only going to get one answer for y. You know, if we plugged in 1 for x, we would get 1 plus 1 is 2. If we plugged in -5 for x, we'd get -5 plus 1 is -4. If we plugged in 100 for x, we would get 100 plus 1 is 101. There's no way to get more than one answer out of that type of equation or relation, so that is going to be a function. So is a function, and FNC is usually my abbreviation for function. Now on the other hand, y squared equals x plus 3, I think it's easier to solve for y first. And if I do that, I get a plus or minus the square root of x plus 3. And if I plug in something for x, I'll use the same value. I'll use 1 again. Plus or minus square root of 1 plus 3. Plus or minus square root of 4 is equal to plus or minus 2. So there I plugged in a value. I plugged in an input value. I plugged in 1, and I got two answers. I got a positive 2 and a negative 2. Because I got two values there, output values there, that means this particular relation is not a function. Let's see here, because we got two values there. All right, so a function, just a relation for which every input has exactly one output. A couple more definitions here for us. Let's say domain. And domain is actually going to be the main attraction in our section today. So let's go ahead and define that. The domain of a function is the set of all valid input values. And that word valid there, we'll talk about this a little bit later when we start doing examples. Valid input values, those are things you're actually allowed to plug into a function. We'll talk plenty about those later on. One more definition here before we move on to something else. Let's look at range. The range of a function is the set of all output values. I thought I would define that here just because we're defining other things, but we're not going to talk about range today. We will a little bit next time in the next section, 2.2 I think it is. But in general, we don't really discuss range in depth until chapter 5 in our course. So we'll talk a lot about domain today, not so much about range, but I'll leave it there for definitions.